Which Jazz players have the most to prove entering the 2024-2025 season? Find out next on Locked On Jazz.
You are Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Jazz. I'm Leif Thulin, excited to be back with you once again with the opportunity to fill in for David Locke on Locked On Jazz. You guys know me by now, but if you're new to the program, I'm a lifelong Jazz fan who's a credentialed NBA draft analyst for Locked On NBA Big Board, attendee of both the 2023 and 2024 NBA Combines, Utah Jazz broadcast assistant the past 3 seasons, along with statistician the past 3 seasons, lover of college hoops. So don't expect all the geeky numbers of usual to be gone, but I'll bring a unique perspective as a diehard hoops fan, both collegiate and NBA, as I give you insights to some of these young players, new to the Jazz, and much, much more each and every listen to make you guys as knowledgeable as you can be entering an interesting period in Jazz history. What will be Jazz history? I think it'll be very interesting. That makes us excited but nervous for this upcoming year. So who needs to prove it? That's what we're going to discuss today. But first, thanks for making Locked On Jazz your first listen each and every day. And remember, Locked On Jazz is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube at Locked On Jazz, where the best way to help us grow is comment anything below. And today's question is, which Jazz player has the most to prove in your opinion? Doesn't have to be any of the 3 I mentioned. Also, I want to mention that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As playoffs wind down, the sports stop sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every single day all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So what are we talking about today? Who's got the most to prove? Simple question, not necessarily an obvious answer. In the first segment, I'll explain why Collin Sexton is the first candidate for me on the Jazz roster to have the most to prove this season. You may have said he proved it last year, but I'll analyze why I believe he's got a lot to prove this year. I'll break down in the second segment why the player with the most to prove probably could be Taylor Hendricks, especially after that up and down summer league, and just kind of contextualize what he did in his rookie season compared to expectations. And then the third season and third player, Walker Kessler, probably has the most to prove of any of these players after a rocket ship of a first year where he was awesome and then he just was not particularly good. And I don't think that's necessarily fair to be so black and white there, but that's kind of the perception. And there's a gulf in confidence. Sky high confidence one year, pretty low confidence the next. We're going to talk about why that happened and why year 3 is such a big year as Kessler hopefully gets through the crucible of emotional difficulty of the NBA and just low confidence after such an amazing year. Sometimes the sophomore slump is because the rookie year was so good, it was better than anticipated, and you come down to earth. So we'll talk about all that coming up next. So let's talk about Collin Sexton. Let's dive right in. Sexton, in my opinion, has had the best year of his NBA career last season. So what does he have to prove, you may ask? Well, that's a totally valid perspective and a decent question, but I have a reason. For reference, Collin Sexton, when he started, averaged 21.1 points per game, 5.6 assists per game, and 2.6 rebounds per game in 51 games as a starter for the Utah Jazz in the previous season, 2023 and 2024. That's really good. I'm not going to dispute that. I think you can make an argument that they're better guards in the NBA and all that stuff, but that's not what we're asking. We're saying, is that a good season? Absolutely. Collin Sexton, however, as a bench player, averaged 14.1 points, 3.6 assists, and 2.7 rebounds in 27 games off the bench. Less good. It's not terrible, but less good. Why does that matter? You'd say, well, he's going to start this year. Like, why are you picking into these stats if he's going to start? Well, that's where it starts to get dicey and why he's got a lot to prove to me. Sexton proved he can have success as a starter, but I would argue, much like I argued for his entire Cleveland Cavalier tenure, it was empty calorie scoring at times. Someone had to score and improve last season, and he took the largest leap as he became further removed from the injury, more healthy, more confident in the new system, a new location. But, there's a reason a 20-plus point scorer in his rookie contract in Cleveland was relocated. He was passed over, and he was not even the top option in a deal. They got Donovan Mitchell, and they were happy to throw in Collin Sexton along with Lauri Markkanen. And obviously, Sexton has value, and the Jazz signed and paid more, but they paid more for money. But they had Garland, and so if a guy's scoring 20 points per game like Sexton did in his rookie deal, why was he so expendable to begin with? I would say it was empty calorie scoring there. That's why I think he was better this year for the Jazz, because it wasn't necessarily empty calorie, but it's something. Well, the Jazz have been burned by having two diminutive guards before, and they didn't. The Cavs were the same way. They didn't want to have multiple diminutive guards. They chose Garland over Sexton. Obviously, got Donovan Mitchell, who we know and know exactly how good he is, but they ran into similar issues in the playoffs as well. Could factor in for the Jazz in the future. So Sexton, to me, the reason I bring that up in terms of diminutive guards, you may say, well, he's a guard. You can play someone tall next to him because he's not very tall. Well, Sexton's not a point guard, in my opinion. Despite his listed height and a number of assists tally last year, he's not a point guard. The reason it's a prove it year for him is his numbers were great as a starter, but on a team gearing up toward the future with the true aspirations of contending at some point, hopefully in the near future, not too distant of a future, I view Collin as a two guard, a shooting guard, and a scorer and an energy guy, not as a point guard, someone who can facilitate and run your offense. I think the Jazz do too. I think that's pretty clear based on the way they asked about if Keontae could be the point guard of the future rather than Collin. But the Jazz also have witnessed and bear the scars of the diminutive backcourt of two great players in Mike Conley and Donovan Mitchell, which means Sexton needs to learn to play the two and maybe be so good this year to prove he is still part of the team's long-term plans. Why does that make sense? That you're willing to give up on someone that scores 20, Leaf, you're insane. I hear all that, but I don't agree with it, because if it's empty calorie scoring, even at some degree, and he's going to be a two guard, you need a massive point guard, and it's really hard to get those. Is Keontae or Collin Sexton the better prospect down the road? My gut would say Keontae, because it's unproven what he's going to be. And through 1 year, the question was, can he be a franchise point guard? Even if the answer is no, it's good to have that question after 1 year about a guard who was drafted 16th. It's a good question to have. Difficult answer, but it's a good question to have. For the terms of Sexton, I expect him to start just about every game, score the second most team points on the team behind Lowry, but the efficiency leaps must continue. That's why I thought his year was so good last year, is he was very efficient, especially when he started. There were multiple numbers this past year that put him in lists of players like Devin Booker and Kevin Durant in terms of efficiency of jump shooting and scoring with certain, metrics that would tell you, oh, he's in this category for this stat. And it was when he was a starter. When he was off the bench, his efficiency dipped. And you wonder how much of that has to do with the gravity of Lowry, how much has to do with playing next to Olynyk for part of the year. All that stuff, well, he's got to put some of those concerns of how it happened to bed. He needs to show that was not a fluke last year and prove he demands a spot based on his play going forward on the Utah Jazz's roster as they improve. Of course, he's got a spot in the current roster, but not just a spot in any roster. You got to be able to have a spot on a roster that has the aspirations of winning. We saw a good player like Josh Giddey didn't figure into the OKC future because a little bit redundant and less good than guys there. It's a cutthroat league. It is. And now if Cody Williams is a two guard and Keontae George could be a two guard, that makes his life a little harder down the road. So it's prove it year to tell you he's part of the future, not prove it in this year just for this year. It's a prove it year to say, yes, on this team with expectations that differ, I am this valuable. And you can make X the amount value out, whatever you want it to be, whether it's points scored, whether it's efficiency numbers, whether it's impressive defense. But it's a trial, in my opinion, for Collin Sexton this year. Jazz fans have deliberated about Keontae George. Like I said, I think he's the point guard of the future. Collin must prove vital, so the Jazz feel inclined to keep building with him once they find their tier one star, whether it's via trade, whether it's this upcoming draft, drafting Cooper Flagg or someone like that. He's got to prove himself vital this year to show that he's going to be a long-term contributor. He doesn't have to prove he's a good player. He's already done that. He's just got to continue impressing offensively with efficiency and improve the consistency on both ends of the floor. He has to prove there's more room to grow and make him so good that he's too hard to replace for the Jazz when the Jazz do ascend. And his role definition must become clearer in the future. And so the future plannings and musings of the Jazz front office take him into account as opposed to having that being a variable that they don't know the answer to. Well, we'll talk about the Jazz's future and the present coming up next. I'll talk about Taylor Hendricks and what he has to prove in year 2. But first, a word from FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games and the sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app up and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster of bonus daily. That's right. That's something for everyone, every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com/locked-on and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. I also want to tell you guys about Murdoch Hyundai. Murdochs have been in Utah for over 80 years. Hyundai is the best car for your money. Safety features, bells, whistles, all in amazing cars in all different sizes and prices. And they're all amazing prices. The SUV lineup features the Kona, the Tucson, the Santa Fe, and the Palisade. I've ridden in multiple of those, driven the Tucson a few times. And they also have sleek cars like the Ioniq 5 electric. It was named the Motor Trend SUV of the year by Motor Trend. The new Ioniq 6 is even better. Electric, looks like a Porsche, and just won World Car of the Year. There are 3 locations within Utah, Linden, Murray, and Logan. And I can personally tell you how awesome the people are in Murray. And one of the guys even there recognized me from Locked On Jazz. So if you're listening, hello, and thank you for your great service. Welcome back to Locked On Jazz. I am really excited to talk about this segment because Taylor Hendricks had flashes that had all of us excited, much like other players in Jazz recent memory, and some have hit and some haven't. So that's why it's a prove it year. I also have one more question for you guys, though, before I get into that. Are you guys watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day and have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels out. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Welcome back. I'm Leif Thulin on Locked On Jazz. And as I was saying moments ago, Taylor Hendricks, 9th pick of last year's draft. And, there's been players that have put up similar numbers to him that have been awesome. There have been players that have put up similar numbers to him that haven't been awesome. He put up pedestrian numbers, which was alarming to some, but also demonstrated the traits that got him taken at 9th. What I mean by that is he had demonstrated the athleticism, the shooting at times, and bloomed late in year 1. So what's in store for year 2, and why does he need to prove it? Hendricks has drawn criticism, and I think it was fair, from excellent beat writers in the Athletics' Tony Jones and the Salt Lake Tribune's Andy Larson during Summer League, to which he responded with a flawless performance in Summer League, scoring a ton with utmost efficiency, rebounding in one game. But it was a one game. The only issue, most top 10 picks entering year 2 either don't play in the Summer League or they do that more frequently in the Summer League. They don't just score 23 in one game and kind of be non-factors in others. A little bit of concerning. I worry with Hendricks that his appeal is super theoretical and a little less real than some people find it. And that's why he has to prove it. Let's dive into the numbers month by month. And obviously they're going to grow as the season goes. This is not meant to be disparaging toward Taylor Hendricks, but it's just to give you guys an idea. He played 10 games in December and he averaged 17 minutes per game, nearly 6 points, nearly 3 rebounds, shot 38% from the field, 31% from 3. He played 2 games in January. He played just about 4 minutes, averaged 3 points per game, shot 66% from the field, but obviously very limited numbers. February this is when he started to ramp up his playing time. 8 games in February, 22.1 minutes per game, 7 points per game, 31% from 3, 44% from the field, and 6 boards in the month of February. Now, March continued to ratchet up his playing time, the intensity with which he was featured, as opposed to sometimes garbage time. This time there was real NBA minutes playing against bettered players. 27.3 minutes per game, 9.2 points per game, 46% from the field, 37% from 3, 6.6 rebounds. That's really good. Now go to April. 24 minutes per game, 9 points per game, 52% from the field, 55% from 3, and 4.3 rebounds. With more opportunity, the numbers got better. But I would argue competition or the intensity of competition got worse as the Jazz weren't trying to win. Some of these teams came in with less than their A games. I went to a bunch of these games. The Jazz lost a lot, and you were happy with the flashes from Keontae scoring 30 in one game against the Warriors. You're happy with Hendricks guarding some of the better players in the NBA and learning how to defend in that. It was good. It was learning curve. The training wheels were taken off. The Jazz rookies were tossed into the deep end, so to speak. That all is good, but I don't think it means as much as if those numbers were the same throughout an entire season. That's why year 2 is a prove it year. He has to prove that the flashes we saw in March and April specifically are legitimate. He started hardly playing and not necessarily dominating the G League. It's not necessarily his game to dominate the game with hey, he's not a ball in hand guy that much, but he became a respectable rookie, averaging 7.3 points per game, about 38.5% from three. That's solid, but it's not something to write home about for a guy picked number 9. And I know that's not exactly how this calculus should be, but I'm just outlining what expectations are typically set for players selected there and how the patience is sometimes thinner for those players. Not necessarily right, but it's the case. What gives me pause is how inflated the shooting numbers are in April. The 7 games, 55%, lifting up months of poor shooting, moves him up to 38, 39%. His shot, though, did improve, and it was obvious. His shot added arc, which was noticeable sitting courtside. Every home game for warmups, I sat there and talked about the very beginning of the year that both he and Keontae George had flat trajectories, and Danny Ainge spoke about it, how each of them added arc, and he thinks that the rewards were shown. I talked about that with Tim Lacombe, Jazz pregame host, former coach of BYU. Seen a lot of people shoot, and both he and I agreed on that, and Hendricks' shot looked significantly better. But now let me give you a little bit of a negative on this side. He was the dare shooter as those numbers moved up as well. And what I mean by that is think of Royce O'Neal. Royce O'Neal was a good shooter for the Jazz, but he got better looks than the likes of Bogey or Conley because the defense wanted him to get the better looks. Jonas Valanciunas is the best example of this I can think of. One year, he shot about 50% from three because defenses, even if he made it, were pleased that he wasn't bruising and banging in the post, and they were happy to let him shoot his 2 threes per game, in which he made one of them. He was the dare shooter after a track record of negative or relatively poor shooting success. And despite him, getting touted as this amazing defender, and at the end of the year, the Jazz giving him tough assignments such as Luka, KD, Anthony Edwards. I was at all 3 of those games, and I was happy to see him draw those matchups. Hendricks, for much of his rookie season, was probably a net negative on defense, and that turned the Jazz mostly playing zone for the first month and a half of Hendricks' significant playing time because man-to-man, he was not a particularly good defender. Hard to believe, but it's true. The shooting being questionable and the defense to me is raw. He's toolsy. He's got amazing traits defensively, but he hasn't demonstrated them at a level where I have this utmost conviction that this guy's an awesome defender. Could he be? Absolutely. I want him to believe he is, but I think he's less proven than people would like to believe. In the Summer League, Hendricks had one great game, which I mentioned. And before that, he was criticized by the media, I think fairly. I've got this from what Andy Larson wrote in an article about Hendricks on the Salt Lake Tribune. And Andy and I speak about basketball frequently, and I actually agree with what he wrote here. We didn't speak about this, but you guys know and love Andy, and here's what he said. Yes, Monday's performance was just one game, but players who end up contributing to their NBA teams in significant ways rarely have these kind of games. In the end, playing at the NBA level just means that you end up naturally making an impact. Hendricks was invisible on Monday. He finished with 3 points and 5 rebounds in 26 minutes on the floor, shooting 0 of 6, but adding 3 free throws. The most discouraging bit of the game was just how little of an impact he made defensively. In a game where the Jazz really could have used his length and athleticism, he stood largely stagnant. When he's presented with a familiar situation, I think he can use his length and athleticism to make an impact, but when he's asked to improvise, he looks lost, or he simply looks lost. On the offensive end, he simply can't be asked to dribble right now. Anyone could make these observations, but not articulate them well. Andy did a great job articulating it succinctly and pointing out there's the concern that in the Summer League, an NBA player who you have these high expectations for hasn't demonstrated any impact on the court. Whether it's even if he's having a bad shooting day, he should be able to get rebounds. He should be disruptive defensively. He's a good enough athlete. In fact, he's a very good athlete. He should be able to impact the game and transition in a running run and gun environment like Summer League is. So Andy asks valid questions here by stating he looks lost and he lacks any ball skills or confidence to shoot the ball at times. So how can Hendricks improve? I believe he will, but how much can he improve, and how much will his improvements lead him to being a part of the Jazz's long-term future, as much as his two top-end traits are valued in the NBA, in having NBA length, which equates to potential defensive capacity, and then the potential to shoot, because he shot 39% both last year and at UCF. But how soon can he realize those traits and make them impactful at the NBA level? And that's why he has a ton to prove. Can he make himself indispensable in the same way that Jaden McDaniels has from Minnesota, with his value coming as an athletic defender and less on the ball, with less ball skills than other players valued as similarly in terms of money of the NBA? Players that make McDaniels money typically are better on the ball, but McDaniels is a special defender. So can he realize some of those traits of the guy he's emulating? He watches tons of McDaniels film because their body types are similar. Hendricks was vocal about that. But that's the goal. And Hendricks is the prototype, McDaniels is the prototype for what you want for Hendricks. But he needs to prove there's the ability to get there and create faith for the Jazz to believe in him long-term as a key piece to build with. Not around, but with. Coming up next, we'll talk about perhaps the most obvious one who needs a prove-it year, Walker Kessler. But first, a word from Gametime. Have you guys ever been to an MLB game? Because I have, and they're awesome. And it's never a better time to go than right now because of Gametime. Gametime is an authorized ticket marketplace of the MLB, which makes getting regular season and playoff tickets even faster and easier. Prices on Gametime app actually could go down with the closer it gets to tip-off, and likely will in the NBA, and it's true in baseball. Even a big game, you wait longer and you take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets, and the prices could drop, and they're available to the last second. It's great. And there's all-in prices, views from your seat, lowest price guarantee. Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. They have easy-to-find MLB tickets for every kind of event in your area or out of your area. For instance, I just bought tickets to the U.S. Open using Gametime and made sure to peruse views from all the seats in the venue to make sure I had the best vantage point to watch my favorite tennis players. Gametime allows you to get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy it, and I can tell you how worth it truly is to be knowing where you're sitting and have the utmost confidence you'll be able to see what you want to see. They also have the lowest price guarantee, or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets or MLB tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back. I'm Leif Thulin with you right here on Locked On Jazz. Walker Kessler. He went from being third in Rookie of the Year ballots and playing for Team USA after his rookie season, after being picked 22nd, to playing in the Summer League. It's a fall from grace. That's a huge drop-off. Not numerically necessarily based on his NBA stats, but effectiveness on a basketball court, and that led to a tangible confidence level drop. I work for the Jazz, like I've mentioned many times on this, and when the Jazz won 2 years ago, I would go to the post games all the time, and Kessler and Lauri Markkanen were always at the podium. They were like the representatives. They had great vibes when they'd win, and they were overachieving, and those two were at the podium talking about it. And Kessler is a boisterous guy, cracking jokes, and Lauri, a more calm, stoic, reserved guy playing. And those two together were a perfect combination for interviews, and they played the heroes for the Jazz. The Kessler was number 2 on the Jazz's must-keep list behind Lauri. And, who knows where he is now, but it was basically Lauri, Kessler, Ochai Agbaji at midway through that year, towards the end of that year, and then the confidence levels have dipped. Obviously, Markkanen has shown how awesome he's been, but the other two had fallen from graces after their solid rookie years and performances that warranted that praise. This season, Kessler saw his role change and diminish, and while statistically the numbers said he was a similar player, he lacked the confidence due to, I think, less confidence instilled in him by the coaching staff. It's been mentioned that Walker and the staff have spoken and there's mutual frustration, but the Jazz and Walker Kessler, two different sides of the story, are both ready to push past it and have Walker continue to be vital for the Jazz is the expectation. That's great news for Jazz fans. And I truly and sincerely believe that to be true. Not just coach speak, not just stuff you hear from the media. I believe that to be true. And I think Will Hardy and Walker Kessler have a very good dynamic that's been established. And I think there probably was some misunderstanding. Do I know the exact nature of it? No. But it's got to be the case because he was so confident year one. Into year two, his role shifted. He played in the corner to start the year. There was a lot of talk of him shooting threes. And then he was phased out at times, playing bench minutes, played start minutes sometimes. It's different. But the reason he needs to be a vital part of the Jazz is right here. In a West where Wemby exists, Jokic, Towns, Gobert, Jaren Jackson, Lively, Gafford, all these different guys, and many more exist. The Jazz need an assertive Walker Kessler to not outplay those guys. He probably won't, but be able to, down the road in the playoff series sometime, to be able to stymie them just enough to lead the Jazz to have a relative advantage on a few nights. Meaning that if the player's better than him, they probably are going to have the better game and probably be better. But if on any given night, if you can outplay them or stymie them just enough, the rest of your team can have an advantage because you stopped someone. You stopped the course of their offense by your rim protection. And Walker Kessler's confidence and his prove-it year is vital for that. It creates an advantage on a few nights, and that can win you a playoff series. Gordy Chiesa, former Jazz coach, someone I really admire in the scheme of basketball. He knows a ton. He knows more than he'll forget more than I'll ever know. And he's a basketball savant, worked under Coach Jerry Sloan. You guys may know him if you listen to local radio. He mentioned to me if a player is inferior but can duel and win 2 nights out of 5 or 6 in a series, that may make you win. That's the difference between great teams and good teams. They have players that aren't on paper as good as the opponent, but those guys win their battles when it matters. Walker Kessler's one of those guys I think will have a vital future in that sense of the word. He's got to be there for the Jazz to have a chance down the road, and his confidence this year needs to be built through having a good year, having a prove-it year. The Jazz need Kessler to be the stopper and bring the energy he brought as a rookie, but continue to take strides as a passer and finisher on offense, because he could be the same player as a rookie, but that's a relative drop-off because it's stagnation. You need improvement that's steady as well. He may have the most to prove on the Utah Jazz for himself and for the coaching staff is he has to get through the confidence barrier, and that can be difficult. Sometimes it's really hard to go from an excellent rookie year where you overachieve to having a similar sophomore year in its sophomore slump. I would say he regressed, and that's even harder to get through, and that's why he needs to prove it the most that he belongs on the Jazz in the long-term future, because he could be super vital to building around players. If you have a center of the future to deal with all those players I mentioned, as well as being anchored to a defense, and you get yourself a two-way wing star, and you have these guards that are developing around, you could have an awesome defense, and you could have an advantage of size on the inside with Markkanen, with Kessler, maybe a Cooper Flagg. That's the way the NBA is trending. You need a center to do it, and Walker Kessler can prove it this year. Thank you guys for tuning in. And let me remind you, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Thanks for listening, and please check out our new live channel here on Locked On. And with your next listen, tune into Locked On NBA. If you're into the NBA right now, like you are, if you're listening to this, they'll have the newest and latest on the NBA, trade rumors, and much, much more. But you can also listen to Locked On Today on the live channels and check it out and see if that's for you guys as well. I'm sure you'll love it. And as always, go Jazz.